Hey guys, welcome back to another video. In this video, I wanted to talk about something critical in the cloud computing space and in IT in general, and that's security. Specifically, how to protect your data in the cloud. Let's go. So in the cloud, just like everywhere else in IT, you have 2 points of vulnerability: your users and your resources. I am mostly an Azure expert, and therefore most of the terms I will say, most of the examples I will give will be related to Azure. That being said, the concepts are still the same for each cloud provider. It is not something that changes from cloud provider to cloud provider. The concepts remain the same. The tools and terminology might be different. One saying I really like about users is that if you make something dummy proof, the universe will come up with a better dummy. Yeah. So you have to always be vigilant about the users, the people who use your cloud, including yourself. Just because you're professional and you know about hacking and phishing and all these things doesn't mean you are immune to these attack vectors. I have personally fallen for phishing attempts just once, right? But I was tired. It looked convincing. I clicked on the email. I downloaded the HTML page. I downloaded an HTML page. It had a Microsoft login window. It was like the path was clearly local. I clicked on it. I entered my email address. I entered my password. I clicked submit, and I was like, oh no, I just fell for a phishing attempt. Social engineering is a very effective strategy for everyone, and everyone can fall for it. So yeah, don't think that just because you or your coworkers are expert that you will not fall for it. Thankfully, there are ways to compensate for your weaknesses. We're going to talk about those. So the first one is two-factor or multi-factor authentication. You should enable this everywhere you have the ability to do so. Your bank account, your email address, your Facebook, your Instagram, your YouTube, your cloud provider, definitely your cloud provider, your work account, all everywhere you should be enabling two-factor authentication, because even if you fall for a phishing attempt, or your password is cracked, or somebody steals your password, you can still prevent a login. You can still prevent people from accessing your resources or your finance or your emails or your private data. So always do multi-factor authentication if you have the ability. That will prevent a huge amount of attack vectors. Now, the second thing, enterprise-wise, is to, at the very least, restrict your access to what you absolutely need. This is called role-based access control, RBAC. And the idea is, if you do not need access to a resource, you should not have access to the resource. So that means that if your IT support, service desk, help desk person does not have role-based access control, and they have access to all the resources in IT. Now, if they get compromised, the person attacking you gets access to everything, even though this person should not have access to this data in the first place. So control your access, make sure that the people who have access to things only have access to the things they need. Now, the third thing is privileged identity management. That's something that I know Azure has. You have to pay for it with Active Directory Premium or whatever. And what this allows you to do is that in order to get some sort of elevated privileges, you have to request them. You don't just have access to important things by default. So what that means is that, let's say your account is compromised, the only thing somebody will have access to is basic reader access, if that. It makes it so much easier to prevent someone from attacking your infrastructure, reading your data, and all that stuff, because this account, by default, only has the most basic access imaginable. So when you do attacks through APIs and programmatic attack, because usually you probably won't go in and click manually as an attacker, When you do that, you just don't have access to it. That's it. In order to get access to elevated privileges, you then need two-factor authentication, and which you cannot get. So worst, people are made aware of your resources or whatever, but at least they don't cause damage. Now let's talk about your resources. How do you protect your resources against attacks? So the first strategy is don't leave things open to the internet. If you have a virtual machine, don't leave it open with a public IP address and a remote desktop port open or all ports open. That's just, don't do that. So make sure that your resources are configured properly. Make sure you have rules, especially in your organization. Make sure you consult your security team or whomever is in charge of that access. Make sure you set up the appropriate rules to make sure that nobody gets access from the internet. If it's not visible from the internet, it's much harder to attack. Second thing, and that's the same thing that we said for the user, is don't give permissions to your resources that they don't need to have. So let's say you have a virtual machine that does XYZ. Does this virtual machine need access to your entire network? The answer is probably no. So make sure you segment things so that they only get access to what they need, so that if they get compromised, only a small portion of your data, only a small portion of your infrastructure gets compromised. Now, the difficulty is that when you get bigger and bigger, things talk to each other, and compromising one segment doesn't mean you won't compromise the rest. But make sure that the resources only have access to what they need. If you have a service account type of thing, don't give that service account full access over your network. That's just bad, because if that service account gets compromised, you are in big trouble. Now, in the same vein as the previous point, don't give out your keys. If somebody or a resource needs access, if you have the opportunity, the ability, make sure you give time-based access and service-based or API-based, or ideally like as granular as you can get in terms of access, so that only specific data is vulnerable at specific times. Those primary and secondary keys and whatever secrets you have that give full administrator access, keep those with your life. And another point is use automation. Automation, as long as you do it right, automation can help you secure your resources. If you automate things such as rotating your keys, managing your identities, making sure you're enforcing certain policies to make sure that somebody doesn't have access to the outside world if you don't want them, all this automation allows you to control access, allows you to control the way resources are deployed, who gets access to the data, what service gets access to the data, in a much more controlled and procedural way. For example, you make sure that old keys get rotated, right? Rotate your keys. If you can rotate your keys every minute without impacting anything, do it, because then there's no chance of compromise. If you compromise a key, this key is then no longer valid. If you compromise access, then the access gets revoked immediately. So using automation to make sure that whatever access something or someone is granted is controlled and goes through a proper life cycle makes it so much harder to compromise your data. All right, guys, I have a question for you. Which security measures did you not implement in your infrastructure? Leave a comment down below with all your vulnerabilities, and I'll make sure that somebody follows up with you. Bye. Hey, don't leave a comment. That was a trick. If you left a comment, you're the better dummy. Bye. All right, guys, that's it for this video. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.